All right, welcome everybody to our Topic Tuesday webinar. We are excited that you're joining us today. We are going to get started in just 1 second. So have everybody get accommodated with the Zoom platform. We have some great presenters today that we're very excited to share their expertise with Mississippi. So thanks for joining us. To help familiarize yourself with the Zoom platform in webinar mode, know that we cannot see or hear you, but we still want to interact with you. And so you'll see the controls at the bottom of your screen, the chat feature, if you'll use that for any technical issues that you have that we can hopefully address. You can always raise your hand if you have a question or an issue, and then the Q&A feature is where we would like for you to drop your questions. We've got some experts in the space of supporting homeless and at-risk youth today, and so we definitely know that you have questions for them, so put that in that Q&A feature and they will be addressed. So to start out our webinar today, as our colleagues join us, we have a poll to test your knowledge around the space of today's topic. What is the name of the primary piece of federal legislation related to the education of children and youth experiencing homelessness? So I am going to launch that poll. You will see it pop up on your screen. I will give you a few seconds to voice your vote on the poll. So thanks for joining us today. We're excited that you all are here to learn from our panelist of experts on the supporting homeless youth, and particularly here in Mississippi. So if you're just joining us, you'll see there's a poll on the screen. We wanted to test your knowledge around the primary piece of federal legislation related to the education of children and youth experiencing homelessness. And so we know that this is a topic we are all eager to learn about from our presenters today. All right, give everybody about 15 more seconds to answer the question. I see a lot of results coming in. And we're excited that you're joining us today for the webinar. All right, I'm going to end the polling. So last call for your vote. All right, it looks like the majority of people got it correct. I'm going to share the results. Majority said the McKinneyVento Act, which is correct, although there are a lot of other acts related to higher education in different spaces that were options for McKinneyVento, which we will learn about today. So I will hand it over to Shannon. Thanks for joining us.
All right, everybody, good morning and welcome to the webinar. I'm Shannon Grimsley, the Director of State Outreach for the Woodward-Hines Education Foundation and the Get to College program. We are recording today's session and will send a link to anyone who is registered. For those watching, the recording today's date is March 23rd, 2021, and the material in this webinar is current through the 2021 school year. In today's session, best practices to support homeless youth in college access, you will hear from experts in the field working with homeless youth and how we can support this population of students in the college-going process. But before we get started, I would like to share a little background on Get to College and then also a few logistics about the webinar. Get to College is a nonprofit program of the Woodward-Hines Education Foundation. We have 3 centers in Mississippi, one in Jackson, Ocean Springs, and South Haven. And we help parents, students, and high school counselors with all aspects of the college planning and financial aid process. And all of our services are 100% completely free. In all of our centers, we offer personalized college counseling appointments where we can tell students when to apply for admission and scholarships, help fill out their FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, or advise on essay writing and interviewing. For the spring semester, just as in the fall, we are offering all of our services in a virtual manner. This will include the counselor webinar series and professional development opportunities, of which you are participating in now, student and parent workshops, remote FAFSA completion, and two-way text messaging. During the webinar, we cannot see or hear you, but we ask that you ask questions through the chat or the Q&A at any time. And we will be monitoring those as the presenters speak and let them know if there are any questions that arise. So here's our agenda for the day. We will hear from our experts on how to support homeless youth in college access. At the end, we will have a Q&A session. So start putting your questions there and we will answer those at the end. And then we'll go over any upcoming webinars and give you all of our contact information. You all met Kirsten earlier. She will be moderating and checking the chat for any questions. And we will let our presenters know as things come up. So I would now like to introduce our featured speakers of the day. Our first speaker is Shirley Fanchan, and she is currently the Director of the Economic Mobility Services at Heading Home Incorporated in Boston, Massachusetts. Heading Home is Boston's largest homeless service provider, serving homeless individuals and families. Her experience and knowledge in homeless and foster care education included serving as the statewide education manager at the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, overseeing K-12 education services and federal policy related to education for foster youth and children. Director of U Access at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, a student support service on campus, primarily for homeless and foster care students who are in need of non-academic support. Chief Training and Policy Officer at the Horizon for Homeless Children, serving primarily homeless young children and their families. Shirley joined the NAEHCY Board of Directors in 2015 and is currently serving as the chair of Post-Secondary Education Committee. When she is not working, she prefers to keep herself busy by volunteering with a few projects related to homeless and marginalized groups, along with taking care of her family, including a 3-year-old golden retriever. Welcome, Shirley. Our next presenter is Dr. Stacy Havlick. Stacy is an associate professor in the Department of Education and Counseling at Villanova University, where she is the graduate counseling program director. She teaches both graduate and undergraduate level counseling courses. As a former school counselor, she specializes in training pre-service school counselors and other school personnel to be leaders and advocates in meeting the diverse needs of all students. Her research interests include investigating the academic, social, emotional, and career college development needs of students experiencing homelessness and first-generation college students. She has presented and published this work nationally and internationally. Additionally, she is a consultant for the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, NAEHCY, where she provides statewide training for universities and secondary institutions on how to prepare students experiencing homelessness for college. So welcome, Dr. Havlick, and we will now turn the presentation over to you all. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having us. So I'm going to start and I'm going to give you some background. We recognize that there are stakeholders from secondary settings here today, as well as those in community settings and those working in post-secondary settings. So how we've organized this presentation is I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm going to talk about the secondary settings and the experience of being homeless and preparing for college. And then I'm going to turn it over to Shirley, who's going to talk about post-secondary and single point of contact programs so we can better support students when they're there. Because I think the important thing to consider is that this is a system. So it's not just we have this single entity in the secondary and then a individual college as well. There's a bridge in between, and we need to learn how to support both and make it a more supportive system for our students to transition. So you heard my background. This research, so I do a lot of research on school counselors in particular, because I'm a former school counselor. My passion in terms of supporting youth experiencing homelessness comes from my practice as a school counselor, because I would work with students experiencing homelessness. I hadn't had much training when I first started as a school counselor to work with students who were experiencing housing insecurity. And so when I went to get my doctorate, I focused my research on that on how school counselors and educators can support students experiencing homelessness. And so as the years have gone by, my research has evolved, and more recently, I've focused a lot more on that transition piece. So how do we support students in high school transitioning to college? How do counselors, liaisons, everyone else, teachers, administrators support students? And then what do we do to make the environment supportive for students when they get there? And in my role with NAEHCY, with the Homeless Education or National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, I work closely with Shirley and others on the board there. And we travel to different states and present on homelessness and supporting students going to college. And we have a single point of contact model that we've been training different organizations and university settings to implement within their schools. And Shirley will talk about that. So who are students experiencing homelessness? So I am using the federal definition of homelessness, which tends to apply K through 12, but can also be applicable to students in college settings as well. So this is the most important piece of the definition: lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So if you think about the situations that may apply there, underneath, it's students who are sharing housing, which tends to be the highest percentage of students experiencing homelessness are sharing housing with others. So I've had students say to me, oh, I didn't realize my friend was homeless. They've been bouncing on couches and sleeping at my house and somebody else's house. And so that tends to be in what you see in colleges, is that sleeping over at people's houses and not having that fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. But it also includes living in hotels, motels, trailer parks. Then that traditional definition that we think of is emergency shelters or transitional shelters, but also includes kids abandoned in hospitals or a primary nighttime residence. It is a public or private place. It's not designed to accommodate human beings. We'll hear of students on college campuses living in the library, taking showers in the gym, and then finding a little corner to sleep at night. And so, or living in their car on the college campus. And so those places are not designed for them to be sleeping and living, and are not adequate for our college students. Living in cars, parks, public spaces, buses or train stations, and then migratory children also qualify if they're under those definitions above. So if you're not familiar with these definitions, I would highly recommend you familiarize yourself with it, because I think oftentimes students may not know that they would be considered homeless, because they may just think, I don't have a place to stay at night, but I'm couch surfing with a friend, so it's okay. But they can get other supports if we know that they're experiencing housing instability or homelessness. So we mentioned the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act earlier, and I'm just going to touch on it here because it's going to connect. So McKinney-Vento is for those in the pre-K through 12th grade settings. We're going to talk about some bills in place in higher ed or coming up, hopefully in the future. So McKinney-Vento was reauthorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2016. And so in this is a primary piece of federal legislation related to education and homelessness. And so McKinney-Vento looks to remove barriers for students experiencing homelessness and enhance access to education. So for all secondary settings and K through 12 settings, there's a homeless liaison for each school. And that homeless liaison helps to identify students, helps to ensure that students are having their needs met and that the school is meeting the requirements of McKinney-Vento. Under McKinney-Vento, students get a free and appropriate education. They get immediate enrollment in schools. So back when I was a school counselor, I had to help with student enrollment. And in doing that, I had to get lease or deed, immunization records, school records. And that's how it works now, that you have to gather all of these records. And when I was there, if a student didn't have those records, they couldn't start in our school until they did. So sometimes that would leave gaps in their education. And so under McKinney-Vento, if a student is homeless under one of those definitions, then they can get immediately enrolled, which is great because oftentimes students experiencing homelessness have gaps in their education because they tend to be more transient. So regardless of missing documents, we can start them right away. And then the school counselor or registrar, whoever is working on that, administrator, can help get the other documents, but get them in and started. They can also continue in their school of origin. So if a student moves halfway through the semester, or I'm thinking in college settings, if they move halfway through the school year outside the district because they became homeless, they can continue under that school of origin, and the school has to provide transportation for them until if that's in their best interest and makes most sense. and continue to receive that, that transportation to the school of origin if it's requested. Now, if they don't know that they have that and can get that, then they're likely not going to request it. So it's our job as educators to make sure that they know the definitions of homelessness and know their rights under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So really important is when Every Student Succeeds Act reauthorized McKinney-Vento, it included this part that wasn't there before, which reauthorized, which highlights the college and career preparation piece. So now within this federal legislation, it specifically says, and I'm going to read this quote, that local liaisons and school counselors who are tasked with college preparation should ensure that all homeless high school students receive information, and that word is so important that's highlighted there, individualized counseling. So not a one-size-fits-all approach, because as we can imagine, students experiencing homelessness have specific needs that need some individualized support as they're preparing for and transitioning to college. So regarding college readiness, college selection, the application process, financial aid, and the availability of on-campus supports. Specific to local liaisons is they must inform unaccompanied, so students who are homeless under those definitions, but they don't have a parent or guardian present. And this tends to be one of our most at-risk groups, and these can be our students who transition onto college too, that they don't have that parent or parental support or guardian support, and they're independent. And so but that on the FAFSA form, there is a place to mark that if a student has experienced homelessness and they're unaccompanied. So liaisons are tasked with informing those students of their independent student status. So that's going to help them to get more financial aid when they go to college. And they can help assist with documentation as well. So if I could have you go to Menti, MENTI.com, and put this code in, or if you have your phone and want to use the QR code, go there. And I'm going to have you respond to this question. What challenges or barriers do students experiencing homelessness face going to college? And this could be what you think they would face or what you've personally experienced them facing. Oops. And I'll give you a minute and turn this over. Good. So I'm seeing emotional support, and I think that's really important. Being able, it's not just those academic needs or college preparation needs, they have those emotional needs and social support needs, knowledge, having support to matriculate through the program. So going from high school to college, money to attend. And so that's not just scholarships, but the money includes all sorts of different things that students need when they're in college. I see an important one there too, knowledge of how to navigate through all the systems. I work at a university, and it's not a huge university, and I find it super confusing. There's usually so many programs and new programs and old programs, and everyone tends to work in these silos. And so knowing where to go can be really challenging or overwhelming. Lack of resources, having the finances to maintain living in a new college area, lacking that family support, financial understanding or support, money again, believing they have the ability to overcome their situation to achieve education. I'm sure those of you, and I'm preaching to the choir when you hear, we need to make sure that students believe that they can go to college, because oftentimes they think, I can't go to college. That's not for me. The drive or the confidence. And then last one I'm going to read here, adapting to the college lifestyle. That's certainly important too, and can be really challenging, particularly if you're a student maybe who's first generation college and has never experienced what it's like, or has someone who can tell them what that's like. So for youth experiencing homelessness, youth are less likely to enter four-year institutions. Majority of homeless are couch surfing, report intentions to pursue college at lower rates, and that might be because they're more first generation students. They may be confused about the college admissions process, that admissions, interviewing, financial aid. If you're not exposed to it, it's hard to understand all of that. But research has found that students experiencing homelessness have desire to attend college to overcome their circumstances. So I don't want, when we do this presentation, we don't want to paint this bleak picture of it's not possible, because if a student has experienced homelessness and they're able to go to college and they're setting themselves up and preparing for it, then those are the most amazingly resilient kids. And so I think it's our responsibility to ensure that they're entering systems that are going to be there to support them. So research has found that students experiencing homelessness benefit from college, but the universities often lack the systems to first identify students experiencing homelessness. They don't necessarily have the right support for them. So in high schools, there's a homeless liaison, but then all of a sudden they go to this college and most universities don't have an outreach, a homeless coordinator. So often universities are lacking training on homelessness, and faculty and staff are lacking that training. They make the assumption that if a student has made it to college, that how could they possibly be experiencing homelessness? And that climate just may not be supportive when we talk about those emotional issues and challenges that students face, that it certainly can be additionally challenging when you're experiencing homelessness. And so there's high numbers of students experiencing homelessness and food insecurity in college. So this is the most recent data that we have. This is from the Real College Survey, which is the nation's longest running assessment of basic needs. So 46% of the respondents were housing insecure, 17% experienced homelessness in the previous year, 39% experienced food insecurity. There's certainly systemic issues too related to students who identified as LGBTQ, Native American, Alaska Native, and Black were more likely to experience housing insecurity. So you're seeing how discrimination and racism and all of that also plays into this. So housing insecurity is more prevalent among community college and two-year students. Now, in my final note here, which I think is really important, is these are numbers from 2018, 2019. And so we haven't even counted the numbers of students after the pandemic hit. So I can imagine that it's significantly higher now. So my last slide before I turn over the floor to Shirley. So implications, it's important. This is implications for secondary institutions. So it's important that you know the McKinney-Vento Act and definitions of homelessness. It's critical that school counselors and college counselors provide individualized counseling and know which universities provide support. Shirley's going to talk about a bill that's entering Congress right now that is hoping to identify universities that are better, that would be better for students experiencing homelessness. So if you're a counselor, then you should know which colleges are where students are going to be most successful. I've heard counselors share such devastating stories about students experiencing homelessness getting full rides to a university only to fail out and not be able to go the following year because the university that they picked wasn't a fit for them. So there may be institutions where maybe they don't get a full ride, but the institution is set for them and can give them support while they're there. So when we do the individualized counseling, we know what those institutions are and can point students in those places. Liaisons have critical roles in supporting youth experiencing homelessness going to college, provide support addressing expectations and beliefs, and ensure that students have the belief that they are able to go to college. Teach self-advocacy skills so students can access resources, teach them that it's okay to ask for help. Oftentimes students don't want to ask for help, or they've made it this far that they don't feel like they need it. And so teach them that when they go to college, they're going to have to ask for help to be successful. And partner with institutions of higher education. So my last slide, implications for higher ed. There's no equivalent in higher education. Again, Shirley will talk about that in a minute. Students in high school are used to working with a liaison, and so we need a similar support on the college level. So there needs to be an extension and a bridge between high school and college to get students there. And so this is an opportunity for partnerships between secondary institutions, between community members and post-secondary members. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Shirley, who's going to talk to us about single point of contact programs.
Good morning. Thank you for having Stacy and myself to be here to present what exactly that we all can do in the education world to continue the support to homeless youth going into higher education. So my role at NAEHCY has been since 2013 when I was working at University of Massachusetts, Boston as the first single point of contact in Boston area higher ed world. And that really brought me to partner with NAEHCY to really begin this whole project in training and helping other campuses to start out a Spark program. So what exactly is a single point of contact program? So actually we have an acronym for that. It's called Spark. I know it sounds like the movie Star Trek, but it's not that Spark. So the Spark actually is really an extension of McKinneyVento Homeless Liaison. When we work at the K-12, we all understand the important role of Homeless Liaison, how they have been supporting K-12 students to really try to get all the resources, the support from the academic piece at the school. And when we work in the post-secondary education world, we realize that it's no such thing on campus. Many campuses, they have so kind of like a volunteer person as the designated person themselves. And because of that reason, and NAEHCY, the organization, had received a lot of calls from students who are graduating from high school, moving on to post-secondary education. And they realize that this is something that needs to be done. And this is how we, as NAEHCY, as an organization, start to really partner with post-secondary education campuses to create a Spark program. So technically, Spark is really extension of the liaison from K-12 education world to the post-secondary world, either 2 years community colleges, 4 years university. Actually, recently, we also have seen that vocational training campuses also have a single point of contact. Now, why is it so critical to have a single point of contact program on campus? Because we all know, and Stacy had kind of like mentioned that when you work in the higher ed world, you know how the system is so complicated, so complex, and also is huge. Some campuses are smaller than the others, but a lot of state university, I can say, actually is quite a big campus. So it's always good to designate a safe person or a designated person that people can connect with, because that person will be a go-to person for not only students, but also for staff, for teachers, for faculty members, for outside service providers to be able to connect, to continue to support the homeless students. And that's really what the single point of contact, the key piece is. And also with the Spark program, the single point of contact staff person will be able to design a program who can expand all the services either off campus or on campus for the students and faculties and staff. And this is really the key essential piece of the Spark program on campuses. Stacey, I can go to the next slide. So why is Spark needed? And I think Stacy had mentioned a lot of the challenges for the K-12 students, how they have tried to maneuver the education system. And when we go to higher education, the system is even more overwhelmed, because not only that they have to take care of the academic piece of it, and they also have to take care of the non-academic piece of that, because we understand the intensity of going to post-secondary education world is really sometimes overwhelmed any just a regular or normal students that who have a lot of support. Can you imagine a student who doesn't have any support from family, from friends, and that's the overwhelming can actually become a drawback for the homeless students to drop out. And we see that a lot, especially in the first year during the transition from K-12 to the post-secondary freshman year. We saw a lot of homeless students actually became very frustrated, and actually they start to get scared and if they couldn't make it or not. So I think this is why having someone that who can be part of the Spark system on campus and connect with the K-12 liaison to continue to support the homeless students or the foster care students, that's really become a so important piece. And the other thing is, and I think this is something that we haven't really talked about in the systematic approach. A lot of folks are things that, well, when someone who can access to better education is really the cure of breaking the cycle of poverty and homelessness, which is true. But a lot of time, because if the homeless youth or foster care youth did not have those kind of support, and that the goal for breaking the cycle of poverty and homelessness will also be broken. And that's the reason for us, philosophically or vision-wise, is really to try to break that cycle for the homeless students and youth to really keep them on campus. And also the other things that working at the higher ed world, and I know some of us in this webinar who has working in the higher ed world also believe that when we're thinking about supporting a SPOT program, why campuses would support this SPOT program, is really about retention and graduation. So our goal as a SPOT is also the same goal, aligning with the university goal, is how to retain a homeless students to continue to finish up 4 years or maybe sometime 5 years in their education journey, but also to help them to graduate into getting a job for the better future. And this is why it's so important for the SPOT lead. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit later on how the SPOT program works when I talk about what I mentioned about breaking the cycle. And also want to give you the history about why the SPOT model happens. As a matter of fact, the SPOT model happens in way before 2008, the first state actually created a SPOT model actually is Colorado. Colorado is the first state to establish the first network for homeless youth in 2008, and they have created a SPOT program in 2009 among 53 campuses. And this is the first SPOT model that we have found out. And then in 2010, NAEHCY has established the Higher Education Initiative to really bring more and more states together to create this SPOT network. Throughout the Higher Education Initiative, which actually I became part of it in 2013, we have established over 15 states to create a SPOT network. And what's that SPOT network to do? The SPOT network actually was a consortium within the state to support each campuses, each other, to make sure that they understand how the resources is going to work out, and to support the SPOT program within the campuses to connect with the students or connect with the external service providers. Give you an example. If you have a higher education initiative in your state, a lot of time the K-12 homeless liaisons would be in that network. The McKinneyVento state coordinator will also be in that network. And majority of the single point of contact personnel also would be in that network, along with other common community service providers, any state agency contact. For example, if the campus, like my office, we serve a lot of foster care students, and then we would bring in the Department of Children and Families to be part of that consortium. The goal is for everyone to be familiar with the resources and who is the contact person within each campus. So if they had begin to work with one single homeless student who are graduating from high school or foster care youth, and that kind of connection, that kind of communication will start to evolve. And that's really what the beauty of the SPOT model is all about. And I'm not gonna, I think we kind of like heard about what is exactly the definition of SPOT program. Is really about extension of what we're doing at the K-12 level. So Stacy, I can go on to the next one. So what is the important piece to think about implementing SPOT model is really understand your campus business model. And I always say that because different campuses have a different business model. For example, Stacy mentioned the high percentage of the homeless students actually, housing security is in the 2 years community colleges or 2 years university, which is so true because majority of the 2 years community colleges did not have a residential program. And we see that a lot across the country. And if that's the business model that you're going to create a SPOT program, you're going to have to really strengthen the resources of what is the outside external resources for the student who are experiencing housing insecure. And that's the reason it's always great to understand what is your campus business model first, and then look at who will be the right person to designate as a single person or the office as a campus single point of contact. A lot of time we see you don't have to just one person to be the single point of contact. Sometimes a designated office could be the one. For example, when I first worked in the homeless youth on campuses, I found out a lot of campuses actually they designate the financial aid office because that's kind of like a first stop for students who start to begin disclosing all the financial situation. And a lot of time financial aid officer got the firsthand information through the FAFSA, which is the financial assistance grant that they receive from the federal. And a lot of time, if the question was checked on that form, they automatically put out those information and create a series of supportive services to that self-identify homeless students or foster care students. So that's the reason I see some campuses actually using a designated office instead of a designated person. The other thing is the SPOT itself has a big responsibility is really to navigate to understand their own campus system first. For example, if you have a big campus over like 10,000 students, which is kind of an overwhelming system that you can imagine for anyone who walked into that campus. Doesn't matter if a staff, a faculty, or student. So for the SPOC themselves also need to be familiar with the campus system, understand how to navigate it, understand who is the go-to person. And that's really what it's going to take for the SPOC to do. And I remember when I was first started my job as a SPOC on campus, it took me 6 months to create this network within the campus to understand how the system works, how to navigate as a staff person, and then I can pass on the information to the students. The other thing is really creating a process for case management. And I think this is something that a lot of campus offices doesn't understand. What is a case management model would look like for a campus services office? Because a lot of campus services is all related to student services or academic services. And to do supportive services is really something new to them. And I remember when I talked to many SPOC personnel and across the country, a lot of time they have to set up a separate case management system aside from what the campus service system already exists. Because so obviously when you work with students, you're going to obtain a lot of sensitive information, and how do you keep those information could be critical and also could be challenging if you are a campus staff. And those things that you do need to vet out with your legal department. And a lot of time when I recommending to the SPOC program who are in the process of creating a SPOC program, a lot of time I would really recommend them to really look at what is the case management model that they will look like. How do they identify the students' student information? Who can have access to those student information in the SPOC program offices? And how do you do outreach? This is the main key about outreach, because I remember everyone who work in the higher ed understand outreach to different group, you have to use the different messages. For example, my outreach to the student populations would be very different outreaching to the faculty populations. And don't forget, education to the faculty and staff is critical for the SPOC program, because without them, actually, you might not have a blooming referral system, I so to say. So I think this is why it's so important for us to really think about how do you do outreach within a big campus or a small campus. So I think I can go to the next slide, Stacy, because I like to use the example to kind of give you some of the highlights. And I would right now, many states have a lot of SPOC program, and I can for example, Florida State University, they have a Center for Academic Retention and Enhancement. They call CARE program. And then Kennesaw State University that I used to work with very closely in Georgia, they also have a campus awareness resource and empowerment network within the state. And they are actually the Higher Education Consortium. And within the university, they also have another CARE program. For some reason, the CARE acronym is really easy to form within SPOC program. And then, of course, at my previous job at UMass Boston, I created the Office of Urban and Off-Campus Support Services, and actually acronym is UAccess for students to contact with. Now, how this SPOC program works, because each campuses, they have a different way to operate. Some campuses have a whole office like UMass Boston, like Kennesaw State University, but some places that I work with, they have maybe only one single person who didn't have an office, but just has a designated staff person to work with, which is still okay, because as long as the work passed out and they say you have a contact person on campus, that would help you to connect with other resources. And I think this is really critical when you have that person in place. How are you going to outreach to the bigger population, which is homeless student? And we found out this is the common thread that throughout the campuses that I contact with in Florida, in Georgia. We start to actually create a network with the state coordinator. The first step, if you're working in higher education in this audience, the first step I would recommend is to really reach out to the state coordinator to introduce yourself, to make sure that your information being passed along to homeless liaison. I cannot tell you how many times I was called by local homeless liaison and asked me question how to apply to a 4 years university or 2 years community colleges. Now, my role is a very unique situation, and I was grateful that my university allowed me to do that. What happened is my role was able to bring the awareness to the local state homeless liaison level, even though they might not apply to my university, but it's okay, because once the information spread out, it's going to provide opportunity for the school counselor, for the homeless liaisons to work with any spot designated person from any campuses that the student are going to apply. So I saw that as an opportunity for us to do some public awareness work at the spot designated person. And I found out in other state, my contact folks that I spoke with, they're doing the same thing, that they would love to connect with the local homeless liaison in order to be able to identify the homeless students before even they graduate from high school. And I also found out a lot of other campuses, including myself, we started this program, it's called Pathway to Post-Secondary, is for the spot staff to really bring the, in the process of graduating 12th grade students, homeless students onto campus, to give them a day of experiencing what is the post-secondary world look like, and really to boost up the confidence for them that actually they also have a right to apply university. And I remember when Stacy put out that the Menti.com, someone talked about what the confidence, and we found that a lot of homeless youth in the K-12 level, they didn't have confidence to think about, or even the inspirations to going to apply colleges. The reason for that is that shameful factors that they were being homeless. And we found that that was a major barrier sometimes for homeless youth in the K-12 system, that they did not see post-secondary education was the other journey that they can actually break through. And because of that, a lot of single point of contact across the country, they start to provide this transitional program, is to invite 12th grade students to visit the campus. Some of us actually had created a mock day. We call mock day basically is to bring together faculty and staff, a financial aid officer, admission officer, to create a day for the senior students, homeless students, who can actually attending a class, have an opportunity to talk to the financial aid officer, have an opportunity to talk into an admission officer, what is the roadmap to apply to colleges and university. And we found that that was helpful. And I think this is something that as a single point of contact, we have a lot of different ways to do our job, to reach out to the homeless students, other than just to support the homeless students on campus. Because not only that we're doing intervention, and we also believe prevention is always the best course of action, is by reaching out to the homeless liaison to really prepare them to make that transition. We call those hands-off transition. Basically, homeless liaison came to me and say, you know, Shirley, I'm really worried about so-and-so when they go to college and university, because we have been supporting them for so long, and now seeing them going away and then not knowing if they have continued support for that particular student, and they got worried. And that's the reason this whole concept of SPOC is really about continuum of care, how the handoff process for the homeless liaisons to the post-secondary single point of contact, make sure that's become a seamless transition, and the homeless student would not fall short of any lack of services. Stacey, I can go to the next slide. So this is all the states that has been filing legislatures to provide support, could be financial, could be supportive services to support the student who are experiencing homelessness. Could be homeless student already in K-12 that are staying as a unaccompanied youth or with the family at the homeless shelters, but also we also including the foster care. Because statistically, a lot of foster care youth, when they age out from the foster care system across the country, they actually would be, they're at high risk at becoming homeless. And those are the states who have been filing legislatures. And I can tell one of the successful states that I look at myself is California. They have been very successfully filing a lot of legislatures to protect all the support services for college students. For example, using EBT on campus to access to the food pantry, some of the, and I think California, and lastly, I heard Rhode Island also filed a bill to provide free tuitions and fee for any homeless students that were attending 2 years community colleges. So all of those, the state right now is filing legislatures. Some of them have passed, some of them are still in the process of passing the bill. Unfortunately, some state has receiving great delay because of pandemic, COVID-19. So a lot of all those legislation has been pending right now. And the other biggest pending bill that I always want to kind of announce that is, I'm sorry, Stacey, yeah, is the Congress, what the bill in Congress is the Higher Education Access and Success for Homeless and Foster Youth Act of 2017, and has been sponsored by two two senators from Washington State and Ohio. And that bill is still sitting at the Congress right now. One of the conditions of that bill is to designate a single point of contact on campus to provide services for the vulnerable populations, including homeless and foster care. And this is the act that still has not been able to pass. And we hope that this year, because of the pandemic, with a lot of resources being I would say not cut off, but not available for homeless students on campus. And we hope that actually this bill would pass. And all those information actually posted on the NAEHCY website. And then the other bill, actually, Stacey, when you talk about that, the fostering for secondary success.
Yeah, so I just attended a meeting yesterday about this. So I think this is pretty exciting that this is a bill introduced this week and hoping to push it through to Congress by Democratic and a Republican senator. So I think that's pretty exciting. Both sides are supporting it, which is rare these days. And so what it would do is it would authorize a program that recognizes institutions of higher ed as homeless friendly or foster care friendly. And so an institution who's providing these services, which many institutions are, could get that designation. And then if I'm a secondary school counselor, I would know, okay, these are the best institutions that I could send students. And so some of the programs that that colleges or universities would have to be considered under this are mentorship programs, academic support programs that complement that instruction, housing assistance, so things like year-round housing for students, break housing, but also scholarships that cover food, financial support, life workshop or workforce development, additional financial aid, counseling, case management. So if they have those, then they could be designated as foster and homeless youth friendly, which would be amazing just for those working in secondary institutions and for students who are looking for schools that they would say, okay, these are the best institutions that would be a great fit for me, where I could be most successful. Shirley, do you want me to do this one? Do you want to take that last slide?
Yeah.
All right. So just to conclude, so what can we do? Collaborate. So I talk to school counselors, do a lot of research with school counselors, and they talk about how they've created SPOCs. So they've kind of identified someone and they just work with that same person year after year. They help them to understand. Destigmatize homelessness at the secondary and post-secondary levels, provide that individualized college counseling in secondary settings, conduct needs assessments, because when we talk about homelessness, you saw all those definitions. And so we shouldn't make an assumption that shouldn't make an assumption that the experience is the same. Students experiencing homelessness can range dramatically in terms of what their experience is, the kind of supports they have. So conduct a needs assessment to better understand the student body in post-secondary settings, as well as secondary. Enhance low-income affordable housing for families and for students on campus. Enhance that system of support for basic needs. So things like food pantries on campus, but also available in the community to students. There's lots of creative approaches that universities are using now, like swipe out hunger programs, where if there's extra meals left on meal plans, that students can use those. So these are just a few, there's a bunch of different things that universities and post-secondary institutions can do. But I think in summary, the most important is just know your population, know the experience of students experiencing homelessness in terms of where they're living and what they need and how your system can address that. And lastly, just that single point of contact. So there's our contact information, and now we will open it up for questions.
Thank you both. This has been extremely informative for all sides of the desk and people involved here today. We do have a question from the participants. It's asking, are there any current unofficial lists of colleges that are homeless youth friendly?
Um, Shannon, can you repeat that question? Is it for local or for talk about nationally?
I think just national, is there a place that an advisor or a counselor can go to if they're working with homeless youth and know these institutions typically have that transition that you mentioned really set
Yeah.
up to support them?
Yeah. So I can speak for Massachusetts because I'm also sitting on the Massachusetts Homeless Youth Special Commission. So in Massachusetts, I have to say, because we have started a network when I work at UMass Boston, 29, is it 20? Yeah, 29 of the state university and community colleges, I would say 80% of them are homeless students friendly and foster care user friendly because they all have a designated single point of contact in Massachusetts. And I also know in Colorado, definitely, right, 53 campuses, they have started the SPOT network in 2010, and they still continue have that SPOT network in Colorado. So I think that the key is every state, some campuses are doing something. Stacy and I have been traveling to different states to do training for the past 2 years. We have been to Connecticut, we have been to Nevada, we have been to Pennsylvania, all those places. And I'm sure if you go to each state, and especially if you contact the local Department of Higher Education, they might be able to point out to where you can find someone like, they may not call single point of contact, by the way, because people like to adopt the name differently, right? And I think Stacey and I learned that. I forgot, I think in Connecticut, they have a different name for SPOC. But if you ask the Department of Higher Education and say, do you know which campus has a designated person that may be able to connect with the homeless liaison? Usually Department of Education, they're really good about putting the post about what every campus is doing. So that would be, I would suggest the place to go first.
Great. And I saw the resource that was dropped in the chat that may be a great place for participants to look for institutions that are maybe easily to identify those homeless friendly universities. We have another question from participants, and this question is, how can we as professionals work to destigmatize homeless and foster youth friendly resources on college campuses and in our communities?
I can start with that. One thing that, we're trained as school counselors, and when even I would imagine at the secondary or post-secondary level, it works as well, is not leading with the term homeless. And so maybe when you're trying to identify students, that you use the term housing insecure, or you simply ask, we train advisors, we train faculty to ask students the right questions. Do you have a place to sleep at night that's consistent, that's safe? And so by starting with those kind of questions, then you can help identify students and reduce the stigma of, you're not, and technically they would be homeless, but I think they'd be more comfortable to say, you're in a position right now that you don't have consistent housing, and they may be more open up to you. So I think language is part of that. Even though the federal definition says homeless students, we tend to try to use the word students experiencing homelessness as well, because chronic homelessness is a small percentage of students experiencing homelessness. It's oftentimes just a bout of homelessness. And so by changing that terminology, that it's an experience that you're having right now, I think students are more open to come to us and seek support. Shirley, what else do you have to add to that?
Yeah. So when I was the SPOT, one thing that I learned about is to break down that stigma is really by bringing allies. And who would be the great allies among folks that you're working on campuses is really the students. So when I was at UMass Boston, I reached out to a lot of student group, and we start to really create this campaign about how to support, we call those disconnected youth, because just like Stacey was saying, sometimes the label of homelessness is really stigmatized for the student who want to come self-identify themselves. So we actually created a marketing campaign on campus, and the students actually would become my ambassador to talk to everyone, reach out to every student to talk about, well, we have students experiencing food insecurity, housing insecurity. So how can we do about that? The other piece is really educating the faculties and staff, because I actually found out the more bias actually came from the adult population. When I say adult populations, because I always look at the students, they're like my kids. So when I first worked at the faculty and staff, and I found out actually those stereotype was come from the adult and the faculty and staff populations. So with that, and my offices had really created a whole training series to reach out to all the faculty council, to reach out to all the different departments, to really break that stereotype about homeless students. Because a lot of time through those conversations, you're able to actually educate them about what really the students are experiencing, why they would become housing insecure. It's not because of any particular reason. It's just as simple as, you know what, the father lost the job. So they have no more money to support them to living on campus, as simple as like that. So I think that kind of approach, that kind of strategies would help in the long way to really break that stereotype, to break that kind of a stigma for the students who are actually experiencing food insecurity and housing insecurity.
Thank you both, and thank you to the participant that asked that question. I know that that's a really great place for us to start as we build this support for students in Mississippi. So I'm going to hand it back over to Shannon, and we're going to wrap it up with some upcoming events.
Yes, many thanks to you, Shirley and Stacy. This was a very informative and helpful presentation. We will email everyone the recording for this webinar in the next couple of days and post it on our YouTube channel. We would appreciate it if you would complete the short survey that will automatically pop up at the end of the meeting. Please fill that out and give us feedback on today's webinar so that we continue to improve on these webinars. Stay tuned for our next Topic Tuesday webinar, which will be Tuesday, April the 13th. This upcoming webinar topic is entitled Colorblindness and Microaggressions and will be led by a speaker from the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation. Please note, this next one will not be in webinar mode. It will be in meeting mode, so it's going to be a little more interactive. So we're really excited about that opportunity to interact on this very important topic. So that will be our next one on April 13th. And then we have two more after that. On April 20th, we will have best practices for implementing a college and career readiness class in your high school. So please pass that along to those who are teaching college and career readiness courses in your school. And then we'll round out our spring series on May 4th by talking with folks who are in different student success offices and how they support incoming freshman students. We will continue this webinar series throughout the spring semester. And if you participate in 5 webinars, you will have the opportunity to apply for 0.5 CEUs. And if you participate in all 10 of the webinars, you will have the opportunity to apply for 1 full CEU. You can register for these webinars, these remaining webinars on our Get to College website. They are listed under the Educator tab and then choose Professional Development. While you're there registering, please check out all the other resources that will be listed for you under that Educator tab. And you'll see a few other upcoming training opportunities for March and April. Kirsten will be conducting 2 more college and career readiness teacher chats on March 31st and April 28th. And then our center directors will be conducting the 2nd and 3rd in our counselor coffee chat series. So those will be March 30th and April 27th. I will tell you that our featured speaker for March 30th for the counselor coffee chats will be talking to the counselors and teachers about national board certification. And I know a lot of you are interested in hearing that. So we will have someone, an expert in that field to talk to y'all about that. And again, you can register for all of these on our website as well. If you have any follow-up questions, here's our contact information. And as you all know, we're always there to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you again for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you all in the next couple of weeks. And thank you, Stacy and Shirley again. And we appreciate all your help today. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you for having